My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 68, a retired second-grade teacher who now grows tomatoes and reads in a house that forgets to make noise. I've learned that silence can do what shouting never does. But at my son's wedding rehearsal in the ballroom, I paid for the bride, turned her head and said, "Clear as a bell. Why are you here? We uninvited you yesterday." I didn't answer. I stood there in a plain black dress, a silver hairpin, steadying thinning curls, my old purse on my arm. No makeup, no seat card, but the woman who paid for the chairs. "I'm leaving," I said, "but not before I see what I need to see." 6 months earlier, Lucas, my boy, who carries grief like a careful package, brought home his new love, Ilara Quinn. She wore a pale green dress and carried a jar of rosemary lemon shortbread she'd baked herself. She laughed at memories of my late husband David, gone 15 years, as if she'd been there for the punchlines. By coffee, she was calling me Mama M, and I was so hungry for warmth that I let a door swing open inside me. I showed her the pearls I'd promised to the woman who would love my son. Like a life's work, a strand passed down 4 generations. "Something old," I said, and she traced the clasp like a blessing. I mistook attention for affection. It didn't go wrong in a single flash. It was small things that didn't sit right, like a shoe with a pebble. At brunch, she told me she grew up in New Mexico with a grandmother. 2 weeks later, it was Oregon and foster homes mostly. She said she was gluten intolerant, then devoured a brioche. Claimed she never drank coffee, then posted a latte swirl with morning fuel. Once there was a brother, later she was an only child. A shrug here, a smile there, and Lucas, bright as a boy, showing a perfect drawing, never noticed. One evening at their apartment, I followed Ilara into the kitchen with plates and saw 2 sticky notes on the fridge: call bank, add joint access and auto insurance, beneficiary update. She caught my glance and laughed. "Adulting is exhausting," she said, warmth turned slightly calculated. I told myself I was guarding nothing more than the past. On a Monday afternoon, Lucas called. His voice held a pause between the words. "Mom, this is hard, but maybe it would be less stressful if you didn't come to the wedding." I looked at my teacup, the one David found at a yard sale for my poetry mornings. A hairline crack ran along the handle I'd somehow never seen. "Of course," I said, and let him believe I didn't bleed. That night, I set the cracked cup on my nightstand. Things don't only break loudly. Sometimes they surrender under heat and time. 2 days later, I baked an apple pie, brown sugar cinnamon, the way Lucas liked since he was 10, and drove it over without calling. The front door stood ajar. I knocked. "It's just me," I called, stepping inside. Shoes by the rug, a jacket on the banister, the dishwasher humming like a lullaby. Then I heard Ilara's voice down the hall, bright and edged. "Ronan, stop calling this number. He's in the shower." "No, he isn't suspicious. Lucas is the easiest mark I've ever had. He added me to the account. After the wedding, I steer, we cash out." "And his mother?" She laughed. "Some old bat desperate to be called grandma. She gave me pearls, real ones." I didn't breathe. The pie cooled in my hands like a small stunned animal. I set it on the counter without a note and walked out as quietly as a thought. 3 blocks away, the shaking began, arms chest breath. Not from the lies, but from the ease of them. Back home, I made tea and put the same cracked cup on the table between us, the cup and me. I didn't replace it. I watched the fracture and understood that silence, the kind I'd practiced all my life, could also be a strategy instead of surrender. I opened a clean notebook and wrote one sentence: "No more being polite to poison." Then I closed it and let the house remember how to make noise again. I didn't call anyone the night I heard Ilara's voice slice through the hallway like a thin, polished blade. I went home, boiled water, poured it into the cracked cup, and watched steam drift in the kitchen lamplight until it thinned into nothing. There are 2 kinds of quiet, the kind that asks to be pitied and the kind that sharpens you. By morning, I knew which one I meant to keep. I scrolled to a name I hadn't used in years: Sienna Park. We met in our 30s at a school fundraiser where the coffee was weak and the speeches were worse. She'd been a patrol officer then, later a detective, and finally, when bureaucracy outpaced justice, a private investigator with a reputation for going exactly as far as the law allowed, and 1 inch further if that inch saved someone. When she answered at 8 sharp, there was no surprise in her voice, only readiness. "You okay, Mara?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I will be if we work fast." An hour later, she stepped through my back door with the old leather satchel she'd carried since I knew her. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like a person who had already walked to the end of several storms and come back with maps. "Tell me what you have," Sienna said, taking the chair across from my notebook. I pushed forward everything I'd gathered, details that didn't match allergies, that evaporated in front of dessert, and the phone call to Ronan, the name alone bringing up a taste like tin. Sienna listened without blinking. When I reached the part about the pearls, her eyes flicked to my throat and away again, as if confirming the space where they had once lived. "You didn't confront her," she said. "No." "Good. Confrontation gives her a stage. We'll give her a mirror instead." She opened the satchel, drew out a tablet with a battered case, and began to type. She asked the questions I hadn't thought to ask, where Alara said she worked a nonprofit between roles, how she and Lucas met in a bookstore aisle labeled Travel, which felt like a script I'd heard before, and who her friends were unnamed, perpetually busy, always somewhere else. By noon, Sienna had requested records I didn't know private citizens could request, made calls I wouldn't have known where to make, and set 2 quiet traps for the truth, one in public archives, the other in the soft underbelly of hotel systems that remember what people forget to erase. She returned the next morning, not with flowers, not with comfort, but with a folder thick enough to account for everything I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined. "She is not Alara Quinn," Sienna said, flipping the cover back with the kind of gentleness people reserve for the dangerous. "Her birth name is Noelle Hart. No legal change on record. She's used at least 4 identities. Noelle Hart, Ava Dent, Lila Monroe, and the current Alara Quinn. Paper trails through Santa Fe, Reno, Portland, Chicago. Short leases, boutique hotels, prepaid phones. She learns a new city fast enough to leave before anyone hears her real footsteps. There were receipts, hotel check-ins under one name paid with a card issued to another. Email handles that recycled the same 3 letters photos, where hair color and smile shape shifted but the eyes didn't. Sienna slid me a printout of a restraining order filed by a man in Arizona 3 years ago. The account read clinically the way the law renders catastrophe into chronicle emotional coercion. Asset access, vanished with cash and recorded passwords. It named a co-conspirator, once a man who answered to R. Vale. "Ronan," I said. "Likely," she replied. "He has his own file, wire fraud conviction. Out for 3 years." They reappear together, then apart, overlapping just enough to keep the music playing. A warmth that felt almost like nausea rose in me. How does she do it so cleanly? "She studies people who believe in second chances," Sienna said. "My mother used to say grifters don't just read faces, they read hungers. Yours is family. Lucas's is being seen without being sized up. She fits those hungers like a key." I looked at the cracked cup on the table, a hairline fracture you could miss until you knew where to look. Sienna followed my gaze and added, "Keys can be taken back." "Then let's do it." "Gently," she said, "so he sees it without you in the way." She outlined a plan that wasn't a performance, it was a sequence. First, document the pattern so tight it couldn't be laughed off as malice. Second, find someone who had survived the same script and ask if they wanted the ending to change. Third, lift your financial hand from every lever you had been told to pull. Fourth, when the day came, you wouldn't storm the stage. You'd open a side door and let truth walk in by itself. "Do you know someone?" I asked at the second step. She tapped the folder. A name appears twice in 2 different states, Jace Romero. He tried to sue and settled quiet. He owns a marine supply shop now 2 towns over. My guess, he's not afraid of hard work or the water, and he's tired of drowning for other people. I wanted to call him right then, but Sienna shook her head. "Give him till lunch. Let his morning belong to him." I baked a second pie I had no intention of delivering, and waited out the slow hours with the oven door fogging the glass. At noon, I took my phone to the patio sunlight, warming the wood, and dialed. He answered with the voice of someone who didn't waste words. "This is Jace," he said. "Mr. Romero, I began. You don't know me. My name is Mara Ellison. I believe we may have a history in common with a woman now calling herself Alara." Silence in the line, not emptiness, more like the sound of a man facing a door he swore he would never open. "What does she call you?" he asked. "Mama M." He exhaled a laugh that wasn't laughter. "She called me Captain," he said. "I never owned more than a skiff." We met 2 hours later on a bench across from a hardware store that had been there long enough to fade respectably. Jace wore a navy hoodie and jeans, the simple uniform of people who work until their hands prove it. A pale scar curved from his hairline toward his ear, the kind you either explain 1,000 times or never once. He didn't shake my hand. He sat as if sitting now counted as consenting to breathe. "She told me I was the kindest man she'd ever met," he said. "Said my life was small, but that love could make it big. She liked my grandmother's rosary, asked to hold it. When she left, the beads were gone. I told myself I'd misplaced them." He looked at me for the first time. "What is your son's name?" "Lucas." "How old?" 32. He nodded once, as if that was an age that mattered. "She will go for the legal levers next," he said. "Joint access, beneficiary, power of attorney if she can charm him into signing what he doesn't read. She'll frame it as the planning, as adulthood as a team. If you push him now, he'll defend the idea of himself he thinks she sees, not her. If you show him instead," he lifted a shoulder, "well, Sometimes seeing is a kind of touch no one forgets. I passed him a slim copy of Sienna's folder, less than the whole, precisely what he'd need if he chose to step into a room where his past might be measured by strangers. He rested it on his knee. She ever call him baby anything he asked, watching a delivery truck idle at the curb. Baby bird, I said before I meant to. She called me that too, he replied. His mouth tightened. They recycle lines like musicians recycle hooks. I won't ask you to do anything you don't want to, I said. But I plan to open a door on their wedding day. I don't want to shout. I want a light. I let the words sit between us. If you're willing to be present, not to relive, not to bleed for her again, only to stand where truth can be seen, I would be grateful. He considered long enough to make the choice real. I'll be there, he said. But I won't be your hammer. I'm not building a gallows, I said. I'm building a bridge my son can walk across without me carrying him. For the first time, his mouth quirked toward something like respect. All right then, he said. Send me the time. The days that followed were not cinematic. They were administrative. I became the kind of woman who plays hold music on speaker and cuts lemons while a stranger in a headset confirms account numbers. I called the venue, the caterer, the quartet, the florist. I didn't cancel anything. I reassigned. Please move the billing contact to the bride, I said in the same tone I once used to explain number sense to a room of 7-year-olds. Yes, I understand the penalties. No, I don't need a refund. Yes, I can email authorization right now. My credit card, which had braided itself through their event like ivy, unspooled with a series of polite confirmations. When I hung up, I cut the lemon in my hand and watched the juice brighten the board. I wasn't sour. I was clean. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery because some decisions deserve witnesses who no longer correct your grammar. David's stone is set beneath a maple that fails beautifully each autumn. I brought no flowers. He'd always thought cut blooms were too theatrical. Give me a garden or give me a branch, he used to say. I took a small brass compass from my purse, the kind he had kept in the glove box, since before GPS made us all the same kind of lost. The needle trembled, then steadied, as if there were still cardinal points to find in a life where North had been missing for 15 years. She isn't who she says she is, I told him. And Lucas is too kind to know that kindness can be a snare. I slid the compass beneath the edge of the stone until brass met earth. I'm not asking permission, I said. I'm choosing the part of you that would be proud. The morning of the wedding arrived quiet, like a room that has already decided not to applaud. I passed over the rose blouse Alara once praised, and the pale dress I'd bought for a spring ceremony that never happened. I took the same black dress I'd worn the day the doctor told me there was nothing left to do but remember well. I twisted my hair and pinned it with the silver hairpin, the crescent of it catching light in the mirror. I didn't look like a guest. I looked like a woman who could walk through a locked door. Text messages had been composed days ago and left unsent. I had one to Sienna with a single word. Now and another to Jace with a drop pin to a gate. The wedding planner hadn't noticed remained propped for deliveries. At 11:20, I drove a route that made sense only to me, parked behind a hedge where I could reverse out without checking a mirror, and sat with my hands on the wheel until my pulse matched the idle of the engine. Then I went in. The venue spread across a glassy meadow, all angles and reflective surfaces, designed to make everyone look more like themselves than they were. I slipped through a side entrance that smelled of eucalyptus and last night's mop water. I could hear the quartet tuning long strokes that made even uncertainty sound expensive. A bridesmaid laughed the way women laugh when other women are listening. The air was heavy with peonies, the kind that bruise if you look at them harshly. Behind a curtain near the end of a service corridor, I found a sliver of space where I could see the aisle and not be seen. People took their seats in the hush that money buys. A woman in a champagne suit adjusted her hat. A man smoothed his son's cowlick with his palm. Lucas stood at the front, adjusting his cuff with fingers he did not know shook. When the music shifted from tuning to intention, I felt the room gather itself into a single expectation, like lungs before a note. I pulled out my phone, opened the message to Sienna, and waited. Not the kind of waiting that prays for a rescue, but the kind that honors a plan. On the far side of the glass, through an angle no one else cared to look through, I caught the glint of a gray sedan easing to a stop. A figure stepped out with a folder under his arm, not a weapon, just wait. Jace paused at the door as if asking the building to consider its role in what came next. My thumb hovered. Somewhere deeper in the venue, a coordinator barked orders into an earpiece. The florist adjusted the arch one pedal to the left. A cellist moved their bow like the last minute of a storm crossing a river. The doors at the back of the hall stood closed, staunch and ceremonial. It would take very little to open them, and even less to keep them shut. I thought of Ronan and how he would have framed this moment if it had belonged to him, a spectacle, a crash, a story told later at a bar as if scorekeeping were intimacy. I thought of Alara and the way she had worn charm like a silk that refused to wrinkle. Then I thought of Lucas at 13, the summer he learned to ride a bike, on the hill near our house, the way he looked back to see if I was still there and almost fell because of it. I had shouted eyes forward and he had obeyed, righted himself, and found balance without my hand. I reached for that memory now and let it guide me. I sent the message now. I slipped the phone back into my bag and let my palm rest against the cool stone of the column beside me. Through the glass, a shadow moved toward the vestibule. You wouldn't have noticed it if you weren't looking for it. Most people weren't. Most people were waiting for the doors to open for a bride. The quartet shifted into the queue everyone recognizes even when they pretend they don't. A small child in the third row asked loudly, "Is it time?" and was shushed with fondness. Somewhere at the front, the officiant lifted a book whose language had worked for centuries. I had no interest in history this morning, only direction. A breeze pushed through the service corridor, lifting the edge of the curtain near my ankle. A single petal skittered across the floor and snagged against my shoe, impossible and fragrant. I knelt, not to pray, not to hide, just to free the petal and place it gently on the sill. It is a strange thing in a moment like this, to take care of small beauty. But that is how I know I am still myself. Footsteps approached on the other side of the door. Calm, unhurried, deliberate. The handle turned. The hinges gave a soft, honest complaint that made a $50,000 room hold its breath. And for the span of half a heartbeat, before anyone gasped, before anyone stood before a single name was spoken, the quiet I had chosen became the brightest thing in the building. I stood straighter and watched the door begin to open. The door opened without fanfare, just the low complaint of hinges that had carried 1,000 errands, but never this one. Heads turned as if pulled by the same string. The officiant's mouth paused between syllables. A violinist's bow hovered in midair. I didn't move from the shadow of the column. I had not come to stand center stage. I had come to keep a promise to my son that he didn't know I'd made. Jace Romero crossed the threshold like a man who had learned to walk into storms without making them larger. No tie-gray blazer, dark slacks, the folder tucked under one arm. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He looked only at the couple at the front, at Lucas, who still wore the hopeful stiffness of a groom, and at Alara, whose smile was the kind that photographs flatter even when it falters. "Excuse me, Jace," said voice, steady enough to travel the length of the room without climbing. "My name is Jace Romero. I apologize for the intrusion. I wouldn't be here if this weren't necessary." The officiant blinked, swallowed the rest of his sentence, and stepped back as if the carpet had grown uncertain beneath him. The wedding planner lifted a hand, then let it fall, intuition outrunning etiquette. A murmur moved through the rows. Alara tilted her chin, the pearls at her throat catching light like a small galaxy. "Sir," she said, brittle brightness layered over steel, "this is a private ceremony." Jace didn't answer her. He raised the folder so everyone could see its weight and spoke to Lucas. "5 years ago, I stood where you're standing," he said. "I thought I knew the woman beside me. She had a different name then, like she has a different name now." He let the sentence breathe. "The name she's using today is Alara Quinn. The one that follows her across police reports and sealed settlements is Noelle Hart." The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was air recalculating. Someone in the third row whispered, "What?" like a prayer that didn't expect an answer. Alara's smile did not drop. It polished itself. "I don't know this man," she said, laughter slicing too quickly to be kindness. "Please remove him." Jace lowered the folder to the front pew and opened it with the gentleness of a person handling something that could cut. Inside, documents in careful order, lease agreements, hotel confirmations, email headers, a scan of a restraining order. He didn't wave them around. He let them sit present and patient. "Lucas," he said quietly, "I will not argue with your fiancé. I'm here to give you what I wish someone had handed me proof before the promise." For a second, no one moved. Then a sound I recognized threaded the back of the hall heels that belonged to a woman who has never run and still always arrives in time. Sienna Park stepped into the doorway, not inside the ceremony, just enough in to be seen, and lifted a phone. She didn't look at me either. She pressed play. The recording was clear in the way a storm is clear over flat water. Alara's voice unhurried and amused. "He's easy to guide. After the papers are signed, I'll handle the accounts. Power of attorney is a bow on the package. His mother old-fashioned, eager to be useful. She's already handed me heirlooms. No need for names, no need for commentary." The words hung where flowers had been meant to do all the work. Lucas's hand dropped from Alara's. He didn't jerk away. He released her like a man setting down something he just realized was burning him. "Is that you?" He asked a question that had only one good answer, and everyone in the room knew it. "That's fabricated," Alara said instantly, the tone polished for social media disagreements. "Anyone can edit audio. This is harassment. He's a stalker. She's an accomplice. We will sue." Sienna lowered the phone. "There is more," she said simply. but this is enough for today." Alara's eyes flashed 1 degree colder, then she performed compassion the way some people perform arias, loud, impressive, empty. She turned to the crowd. "You came to celebrate love," she said. "Don't let strangers spoil it. Look at us." She held Lucas's hand again, or tried to. He didn't take it. "Answer him," Jace said to her, not unkindly. "Tell him your real name." Her attention clipped to him like a fastening. "You don't get to..." "Tell him," he repeated, and the compassion fell from her face like a stage set, unhooked from the rafters. The room waited. It's the back, a florist shifted a bucket of roses that suddenly weighed more than roses should. The quartet put instruments down in quiet, respectful defeat. Alara breathed in through her nose, out through a smile. "This is ridiculous," she said more softly, turning back to Lucas, the pivot of professionals. "Baby, you know me. You know who I am. You and me, we've planned our life down to the color of the curtains." Something in me wanted to step forward, then to pull my son back from the undertow of that voice, but I held the column in my ground. He had to hear himself. "Is your name Alara?" he asked. Her silence, which had been her instrument, betrayed her. Sienna didn't make him carry it alone. She lifted the phone again and played a second clip, shorter. "Crueler and unforgivable in any language. He'll sign anything if I make it sound like a future. His mother is sentimental. Hand her a story and she'll pay the bill." The planner's clipboard slid to the floor. Somewhere the officiant closed his book because there are lines even liturgies won't cross. Lucas looked at the ring in his fingers like it was a translation of a language he no longer spoke. He didn't throw it. He didn't clench it. He let it drop. The soft chime against stone rang through a room that had paid so much to hear nothing but music. Alara's control cracked along a seam I doubted she'd known was there. "You're going to take her side," she spat, and for the first time she said my name without saying it, the syllables wrapped in contempt. "Your mother?" She laughed, a sound that mistook cruelty for sophistication. "Lucas, grow up." He faced her with his careful calm of someone who has suddenly remembered what his backbone is for. "My mother is not the question," he said. "Who are you?" There was a movement at the vestibule, not dramatic but definitive. 2 plainclothes detectives stepped in, 1 man, 1 woman, both wearing the kind of expressions that rooms make space for. Sienna had told me she'd sent packages to 3 offices. Apparently someone had decided that a wedding venue was a good place to prevent a crime instead of investigating after one. The woman spoke first, voice even. "Ms. Quinn, also known as Noelle Hart. We'd like to talk with you about complaints filed in Arizona and Oregon, and about documents submitted under false identity to vendors here. You're not under arrest at this moment, but we will ask you to come with us. Do not make us change the grammar of that sentence." For a flicker, Alara looked truly young, too young for the architecture of harm she had built. Then the age returned to her, the practicedness. "This is absurd," she said, still performing for the audience she no longer had. "You people are destroying a wedding." The male detective's gaze moved slowly over the room, taking inventory of shock. "No," he said, as if correcting a math error. "We're preventing a theft." She reached for Lucas as if the word itself were a rope. He stepped back. The pearls at her throat shifted cold moons. For the first time, I saw them not as theft, not even as symbol, but as evidence of a story she had tried to write with my ink. "Take them off," I said quietly. I hadn't meant to speak. The words came like a reflex considered long ago. She snapped to face me, all performance stripped now, only the blade left. "You don't tell me what to do." "Then I will," said the woman detective firmer. "Remove the necklace." Alara hesitated, calculated, and then, because calculation suggested compliance would buy her something later, unclasped the pearls and set them on the front pew beside Jace's folder. The sight of them sitting next to proof steadied me more than I expected. Sienna pressed 1 more button on her phone. The last recording was barely a sentence. "Make his mother feel like a joke," Alara's voice said, breezy bored. "Jokes pay better." I didn't flinch. I have been called worse by people who once loved me. But I watched my son hear it, and I saw the part of him that had wanted so badly to believe rearrange itself around the truth. The detectives moved forward. "Ms. Hart," the woman repeated, choosing the name on the filings now. Alara looked from them to Lucas, to the room, to the pearls, to the door. For a heartbeat, I thought she might run, not because she could get far, but because running would grant her a story with sharper verbs. She didn't. She went with the detectives like a woman who understood that sometimes the only control left is posture. They led her past me. Her eyes met mine, no plea, no apology, just a cold note to self. Remember the face that refused to disappear. I didn't give her more than that. Not triumph, not pity, just a refusal to vanish. When the doors closed and the music did not resume, a new quiet arrived, heavier, honest. The kind of silence that finally admits what the noise had been hired to disguise. Lucas stood under the arch. He didn't look at me first. He looked at everyone. I'm sorry, he said, and the room leaned forward because contrition at an altar is the oldest sentence we know. I know you came to celebrate. We won't be having a wedding today. No one applauded. It would have been wrong to, but people nodded the way people nod when they have participated in harm by accident and want to consecrate the attempt to do better. He turned, then found me in the dim edge, and for a second he looked like the boy who had once called from the top of the hill. Don't let go. I didn't move toward him. I had already let go. That was the point. I stepped from behind the column, walked halfway down the aisle, and spoke only to the room, not to him, not to her. I did not come here to ruin a wedding, I said, voice even. I came to keep a promise I made the day I named my child, to protect him from what would eat him alive while calling itself love. I turned and left before anyone could turn the moment into commentary. Through the garden door, peonies brushed my sleeve. The air outside was ordinary sweet earth-cut grass, the distant sound of someone practicing a trumpet 3 streets over. My hands shook once and stopped. Somewhere behind me, chairs scraped and people started the logistics of a day returned to itself. I paused at the hedge where my car waited, looked back only long enough to see Sienna and Jace in the same doorway. 2 kinds of witness, neither asking for thanks. I touched the silver hairpin to make sure it was still where I'd fixed it that morning, small crescent catching sunlight like the clean edge of a new page. Inside, a life had stopped. Outside, another one had started. The hinge between them was a door that knew how to open. No one told the band what to play at the reception that wasn't a reception. They chose a quiet standard and kept it low, a thin ribbon of sound that didn't pretend to heal anything. People arrived by habit because food had been cooked and chairs had been borrowed, and it felt wrong to send all that preparation back into trucks without giving it a purpose. Servers moved carefully as if grief might shatter if set down too quickly. I stood near the ice sculpture that had begun to surrender its edges. A swan, perhaps, or a question mark, hard to tell now. Condensation gathered, slid, and fell in neat drops, a metronome for the room's new tempo. Sienna drifted by long enough to touch my elbow. You did what you came to do, she said. It wasn't praise. It was a weather report. Across the hall, Lucas moved from table to table, not apologizing. There are some things a man cannot atone for on a single afternoon, but acknowledging, which is its own kind of courtesy. When he reached me, he didn't speak right away. We stood shoulder to shoulder the way we used to wait for the school bus in February, breath-fogging silence, easy. Thank you, he said finally, for what I asked, for not stepping between me and the truth, he said, for letting it hit me clean. We watched a cousin try to balance a plate and a conversation at once, failing in a charming way. Someone laughed and then seemed ashamed of it until others followed the sound, small, unpolished human. Do you hate me? Lucas asked, as if we were still standing at the altar and the room had not changed around us. No, I said, but I might not be ready to love your choices for a little while. He nodded, accepting an answer that could hold contradictions without splitting. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box I recognized by feel before sight. I should have asked you before, he said. He opened it. Inside, the pearls lay in their tidy line light, resting obediently along each sphere, no hint of the throat they had just left. They belonged to the woman who taught me the difference between comfort and care. He said, voice roughened by something sturdier than embarrassment. He set the box in my hands. Keep them. Or give them when you decide someone has earned them. Not when you're hungry to believe you have. I closed the lid. The click was softer than the ring hitting stone in the chapel, but it carved just as deep. Not today, I said, but someday. He exhaled like a man stepping out of a suit that had always been one size too hopeful. Sienna says the detectives will call, he added. Statements copies the dull necessary pieces. Dull is good, I said. Dull is safe. We ate a few careful bites, greens more bitter than the menu intended, a lemon tart, with honesty too sharp for celebration. He winced and smiled at once. You always said sour means it's real, he murmured. I said it about tomatoes, I corrected. But it travels. Jace approached, stopping at the respectful distance of a man who knows the cost of rescue. He nodded to Lucas. I'm sorry it was you, he said. I'm grateful it wasn't you for longer. Thank you for coming, Lucas replied. It wasn't a throwaway line, it was a handshake between 2 men who recognized a wound by its outline. After a while, the room thinned. People boxed pastries, wrapped leftover salmon in foil-stacked chairs, with the reverence we usually reserve for altars. I drove home without the radio. The house greeted me with its old silence, the kind that lets you hear your own steps. On the kitchen table, the cracked cup waited. I set the velvet box beside it, white on white, break beside pearl and brewed tea I didn't drink. That night, I slept without dreams loud enough to remember. In the morning, I washed the hairpin, let the crescent rest on a towel, and opened windows so the house could exchange the day before for one that fit better. Time doesn't pass so much as it reshelves us. Weeks filed themselves into a new order, calls with a detective who preferred verbs to adjectives. appointments canceled kindly by vendors relieved to be paid, a locksmith who replaced nothing and yet made the house feel safer. I planted basil and watched it argue with the sun, stubborn and fragrant. On Sundays, Lucas came for dinner. We didn't mention names. We talked about a new mechanic he liked, a book I didn't, a movie we both agreed was better than its marketing. Occasionally, the conversation tilted toward absence and tilted back again before it spilled. One evening, he brought a woman to the porch and introduced her the way decent people do, with no hook to hang a fantasy on. "Mom, this is Laurel Hen," he said. She wore scrubs beneath a sweater ink on her wrist that said oxygen in small letters. When I offered iced tea, she asked for water. When I said I had pie, she said maybe later, as if the word later were a promise, not a posture. She cleared plates without asking where they lived and put them exactly where they should go. After they left, I sat with the velvet box in my lap and did not open it. Some gifts are heavier when you're certain. A year turned itself over the way a page turns when you've been reading long enough to trust the author. The garden I had been neglecting grew forward. Peonies shouldered up and confessed their colors. Lavender learned the wind and taught it back to the yard. We set out folding tables and a string of borrowed lights for my birthday, because birthdays are better when someone else thinks to count. People came who had forgiven us long before we learned to forgive ourselves. Sienna brought a pie and didn't call it symbolic. Jace brought a small sack of river stones, each one flattened by time into an argument for patience. Lucas arrived late, not in the way of a man escaping, but in the way of a man finishing a task properly. Laurel came with him, hair tied up, eyes clear. We ate, we laughed, the kind that doesn't study itself for accuracy. When the sun slid toward the neighbor's chimney and the string lights found their purpose, I excused myself and went upstairs. The top drawer held the box like a memory that had never argued with me. I carried it down, palms honest. "May I?" I asked them both. Lucas nodded. Laurel did too, unsure but steady. I opened the box. The pearls did not flare. They simply endured, which is what the best things do when we keep them from spectacle. These were promised to a bride once, I said. But promises made to hunger aren't promises. They're bargains you can't pay for twice. Laurel started to protest. Good women do, then stopped and listened instead. "They are not for tonight," I added. "They're for a day when neither of you is proving anything, when the story doesn't need jewelry to be true." I closed the box and placed it in Lucas's hands. He didn't look at me for instruction. He looked at Laurel for agreement. She nodded, tears not dramatic at all, just moisture forming where something had a right to burn. "Thank you," she said. "For waiting," I replied. Later, after people had claimed plastic containers and hugged without counting, I walked the yard alone. The air held cut grass and smoke and a faint sweetness from the last slice of pie no one wanted to eat, because it would mean the evening was done. I thought of the compass under David's stone, the needle convinced of north, whether we were or not. I thought of a ring's small chime, of a door's honest hinge, of a cup that breaks where heat insists. I did not take the pearls out again. I did not pin a speech to the night. I let the quiet finish the work. Because in the end, what remains after the music is not the sound we made, but the rooms we refuse to leave ourselves in. And if anyone asks years from now how I knew when to speak, I will tell them the truth: I didn't. I only knew when to stop pretending that silence always means peace. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.